question was brought up about countries like Iran, North Korea, who are perpetrators against the human rights. Sabrina wants to know sort of what is being done, what the UN actually does to enforce and to change the behaviors so that the world is a better place. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for rephrasing that question. Look, I mean, we can focus on Iran and North Korea. There's many countries that need to be on that list in terms of what the UN should be doing in terms of monitoring or ensuring or enforcing, that they accept human rights norms. A long time ago when the UN was in its formational stage, there was discussion about the UN actually having its own military. Now, as you know, the UN doesn't have its own military. You see the blue boots and the blue hats, and you believe, okay, those are UN troops. They are UN troops, but it's not their own standing military. Those are troops that have been given to them by other nations, right? And the US often has a disproportionate amount of troops that it gives to the UN. Now, the challenge there is the UN is unable to respond in a very effective manner because it does not have a standing army. When you're talking about standing up against genocide and mass atrocities or other things, you need a standing army to make that difference. In Rwanda, that was a huge challenge. Even in Yugoslavia, where the UN was being attacked and basically they were pinned down to a point where the opposing army was able to come in, commit the mass atrocity, and then leave. Right? And that effectiveness of the UN is because they do not have that standing army that is basically strong, powerful, continuous, and something that is not dependent on what states may or may not give them at any moment or any time. That's one issue. The other issue is the UN, in a sense, without Security Council approval, very little can be done on the enforcement arena. So the UN can use things such as they can pass a resolution, they can set embargoes, right? They can try to cut off supplies. They can possibly even send inspectors. They can send human rights special rapporteurs who actually do investigation of specific human rights issues. UN can do all of these things, but oftentimes the state has to invite or be open to that. And that is the difference between, and that is the challenge of having territorial sovereignty and upholding human rights. And oftentimes what you'll see is there's a clash between these two ideals. We want to uphold human rights, but how do we do so in a way that the state actually allows us to come in, penetrate, investigate, and ensure that they are upholding those rights? And this is the tension that exists. This is the biggest tension that exists in our society right now. And how do you value both those principles? How do you value transparency, accessibility, accountability? How do you value territorial sovereignty? These are questions that I hope one day you guys will answer. How we're trying to answer that is by saying that we're going to be a watchdog. We are going to hold states accountable to what they have signed on to and ratified as treaties. We will hold states accountable to what they've accepted under the UPR mechanism. And if they are not moving and if they're not going to implement changes, then we will be the enforcement, in a sense. Because as an organization, we're able to do both advocacy and litigation. So if we see a country that's not adhering to their human rights norms, we will not hesitate to enter that country, partner with either local law firms, NGOs, legal clinics, and others to actually write reports or to even bring suit in that country. So in a sense, we have to step back and say, look, the UN has a particular role that it plays, but enforcement hasn't been a really successful one. And either they have to change their internal dynamics, specifically starting with the UN Security Council, and basically how resolutions are passed and how that voting occurs, where basically one of the 5 member states of the UN Security Council can block any resolution. That has to change, or we see the UN as a mechanism that highlights atrocities all across the world. And NGOs and legal clinics and students and others utilize these mechanisms to hold them accountable and bring light to these issues. A lot of the issues that maybe I'm talking about today, you may have never even heard of. Some you may have. But it's the importance about knowing these issues and then putting a spotlight on these issues that I think is going to help with the enforcement. And then having NGOs and others who have the resources and expertise to actually go in and force the government to change their policies through bringing litigation, through advocacy, through grassroots movements on the ground. Thank you.